So I'm going to talk about black bear signs. Pretty much everybody knows what black bear tracks look like, but a lot of times in the forest, there are trails that are covered with redwood duff or whatever, and tracks will not show up in that straight. So it's really helpful to be able to recognize signs that bears leave, and they leave a lot of sign because they're very large animals, and they go blundering through the forest, kind of like humans, and they step on things, they break things, and they make a lot of sign. And it's really fun to follow bears through the forest and look at the kind of sign that they leave. So let's look at a few of the signs. I can't hit everything because I only have an hour, but interesting. There we go. Okay, so bear trails. So one of the things that bears do is they will use the same trails over and over. And particularly during the mating season, you'll find a bear will stomp on a trail and turn around and go back over that trail, then turn around and go back over it again repeatedly over the same section of trail. And what that does is it leaves behind this really cool sign. You'll find divots, just these circles worn into the substrate by the stomping action of the bear's feet as it stomps with the same foot, or in the same hole every single time that it goes past that trail. So this is what's referred to as a stomp trail. Some other trackers call them ritual marking trails, but this is a very common sign. And I need to figure out how to get rid of this thing so I can see the whole screen. Okay, there we go. And on the right over here, the same thing is going on. Whoops, didn't quite mean to do that. There, okay, so you've got a very well-worn circle right here. Sorry about that, something's going on here.
We can see your cursor moving too, so if you circle something.
Okay, oh, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so what you have is just very well-worn areas in the substrate, and the bear's trail goes both directions here. And it can be hard to see at first, but with a little bit of practice and following these trails, you're going to end up seeing them. Pretty soon, they'll start to stand out to you just like little highways. Come on. There we go. Next. Okay, so in grass, especially in the springtime, you're going to get trails that look like the ones there on the right. And you can see that it kind of goes left, right. And bears in springtime are looking for food. And in this area, we have a lot of grass, and that's the main food that they eat starting around March. And in March, you really don't have any berries ripe yet. You don't have any other really good green stuff. The main food sources are logs that they can rip open and grasses, so that bears can subsist on grass. And it's not uncommon to find an entire bear scat composed just of grass. So these trails are pretty common in the springtime. And on the left, this is more of a late summer type trail. And by that time, the bear has been using the trail over and over. And so you end up with a very well-worn trough almost in the landscape. And this particular trail was located next to an apple orchard. And so the bears had been coming out from the brush and going out to the apple orchard and feeding on the apples, and had been doing that repeatedly all summer long. The apples started to ripen around June or July. There was an old orchard in the state park where I took this picture, and there are pear trees, apple trees, persimmon trees out there. So things are ripening at various times of year. So this is a late summer trail, and this is what the bear trails on the right will look like if they get repeated use for a few months. So the name Stomp Trail, I'm taking that from the research of Dr. Lynn Rogers, who runs the North American Bear Center in Minnesota. Other trackers call them ritual trails because remember, like I said, the bears will walk over the trail, turn around, walk back over it again. And each time they do that, they're their feet really hard in the ground. And if you see them on trail camera, they have a very stiff-legged walk with their hind feet. So their hips, their legs, they sort of move from the hip and do this sort of cowboy walking thing. And what that does is it allows their foot to contact the ground and kind of rub on the ground a little bit. And there are glands on the bottom of their feet. So those scent glands are depositing scent with each one of those footsteps. And I've got trail camera videos showing a male bear making a stomp trail and then a female bear coming along a day later and sniffing every one of those footprints where the bear placed his feet because of the scent. So those are primarily for scent marking. A lot of trails like the one that you see on the left are serving multiple purposes. So this one on the left served to get the bears onto a regularly used pathway that they use to get between two watersheds. And so it got a lot of use. By the end of summer, it looks very obvious to the human eye that there's a trail there. But in the spring, the bears are just beginning to use it. And so you see some of the broken down grasses in the lower section here, how these are all knocked down in the direction the bear was coming. And this part right here shows a lot of heavy use. So that particular trail is not what I would call a ritual trail. That's just a trail that they made to get to resources. So in this case, they were accessing this field, which was full of grass. And then later on in the summer, they were just using it to travel throughout their habitat here. So another sign that bears leave, and this is common in the springtime, is bear beds. And what they do is they will create dens in the wintertime where they'll find like a hollow redwood tree or underneath a root ball of a fallen tree, even inside dead snag trees, any hollow place that'll protect them and keep them warm during the winter months, they might use as a hibernation den. And in our climate, bears are not really hibernating the entire winter like they are in areas where there's a lot of snow. Where there's a lot of snow, they will go into the dens and they will retire to those dens for a couple of months and go into a torpor-like state. The cubs are born in the den in the end of January, early February, and the mother bear is awake and she does clean them and lick them and keep them warm and nurse them. So she's not in a state of complete hibernation where she doesn't rouse. But they will make beds like this. These are more of a temporary thing that they make in the springtime. And it's particularly easy to find these near food sources. The one on the left that you can see here with the flattened area right in the center, can you guys see let me use the little drawing here. So right here in the center, oops, sorry. See how this area right here is all flattened. So that's where the bear was laying. And it's at the base of a large tree. That's very common as far as the location. Over here on the right, there's also a large tree, and the bed is down here at the base of it, very flattened area there. These beds are often ringed with scat, and there is a huge accumulation of scat around this bed here on the left. And on the one on the right, you can't really see it. I'll show you some pictures of it, but there's a bunch of little scats in here. When I found this bed, there were probably 5 or 6 different scats ringing that bed. So it's very common for them to sleep in their bed and then they wake up and they just deposit a scat and go about their day. The one on the right was at the base of this big tree, and the big tree had marks on it from climbing. And it appeared that there was a family of bears that had cubs that stayed at the base of that tree. And so mother bears tend to send their cubs up a tree if there's danger or if they perceive what they think is danger. The thing to do is they send their cubs straight up a tree, and cubs are very good at climbing even from a very young age. So they can climb quickly and they climb for play, so they know how to do it. And so oftentimes in spring, mothers with cubs will make beds right at the base of a large tree in their environment. The scat is another bonus for a tracker because there's just huge amounts of scats around these beds. Okay, and here you can see where what happened was the bear prepared a mattress. So on the left, you can see the trees. Those are redwood trees. And the top of the tree shows the typical appearance of the bark. And we're all used to that because we're around this area. This is the normal appearance of the bark up here. Down here, you can see all these scratch marks where the bear has reached up and scratched this, the bark off and then made a mattress. And what you see on the right here is that little mattress. And I put a ruler in the center. There's a 6-inch ruler right in here. You can see how big this is. So this whole thing right here is the mattress that the bear made. And it's got a sort of a round, hollow shape to it. And that's very typical of bear beds because they'll curl up and sleep in that. I've seen them rip branches off of trees with like Douglas fir trees with needles on them. They tear them off the tree and pile them up and make a mattress. Sometimes they'll just scrape together debris to make a mattress. And other times they'll actually remove, especially redwoods, they'll remove the shredded bark and make a mattress out of that. So that's where they sleep. Okay, this is another sign that you'll find in trees from bears. This is an apple tree in an old orchard in a state park. That's the one that I was showing you, that well-worn trail. And the trees look like they've been topped. Something's up there. It looks like almost like an osprey nest because the branches have been broken and moved into the center. And what happens is bears create these, and they're called bear nests, although they're not used to raise young. And it's more of a feeding sign than it is a sign of reproduction. So they climb the tree in the late summer when there are apples on it. And the branches that are too small to hold the weight of the bear are broken off and pulled inward. And the bear eats the apples off of them and then stands on the branch, pushes it under itself and stands on it. And over time, as it breaks off more and more branches, it creates the platform. And you see the platform there on the left. The tree on the right has been sort of topped also, but this one on the left shows a nice, well-formed platform from many years of bears feeding in this apple tree. Okay, so the other thing that bears do on trees is they mark. They, similar to how deer rub their antlers on the bark of trees, bears rub their backs. So this is a common behavior during the mating season, and it's also very common in springtime. And what they're doing is, first of all, they have a very heavy winter coat that they need to shed. So part of it is this rubbing action can help them to loosen and get rid of some of that heavy winter fur so that they have their summer coat. And it probably itches. It probably really feels good to them to scratch those itches on their backs. So they rub their backs on trees. And they're also leaving scent when they do this. So the idea with these trees is it's a visual and an olfactory marker. So another bear will come along and notice that this tree has been marked. They can smell it, and they also see the marking. And the marking that they're looking at is right here. See behind the bear how there's a bit of bark missing on the tree, and it's at head level. So what happens is the bear will be rubbing its back on the tree, and it will turn its head when it's facing away from the tree, turn its head and bite into the bark, and that will create a set of scratches from the teeth, from the canine teeth, that is parallel to the ground, perpendicular to the tree. And that's one thing. They will also use their claws. So where the bear is sitting with his back to the tree, he'll reach his claws behind his head and rake them forward on the bark of that tree, leaving parallel marks. So that's another way of making a visual marker, and the rubbing action leaves scent on the tree. So on the left is one of those trees. And you can see how tall the markings are where the bear has been biting and scratching, because you can see the right here, you can see all the removed bark on that redwood tree. And on the right-hand side is what you see if you look really closely at these trees. So if you look at the bark and broken branch nubs on these trees, you will find bear fur snagged in the bark. And bear fur can be brown or black. In the sun, it will bleach out kind of a brownish over time. But it's usually a nice kind of a coarse, long hair, and it'll be stuck at all levels on that tree where the bear has been rubbing its back. So here's what a tree looks like after the bear has been biting and clawing on it. So on the left-hand side, you can actually see some of the claw marks in it right here. I'm just going to go above them, but you can see some of the claw marks. Over here, this is possibly a claw mark. Usually with the tooth marks, they're going to be at a different angle, but see how these are all angled like that? Those are probably all claw marks right there. And those are about between 6 and 7 feet up a tree. It depends upon how tall the bear is. And this is the visual part of those markers. So they're using claws, they're removing the bark. They will face the tree and bite the bark. Also, I've got a trail camera video showing a bear facing a tree and just biting a chunk of bark out of it. And that is primarily a visual marker for another bear. Oops. So on the left is another one of those trees where the bear was rubbing its back, and you can see the angle of those marks. Those were made by the claws rather than biting. Those were the claw marks made when it reached behind its head and just raked its claws forward to make those marks. And on the right is what you get if you look very closely at these trees. One thing to note over here on the right is the appearance of these edges. See these edges, this bark, they're kind of rounded off. Normally when bark breaks off, it's not rounded, it's very sharp edged. But the more the bears rub these edges, the more they'll become rounded. It's almost like their fur sands it down a little bit and makes it smooth. So that's another thing from these marking trees, is the smoothness of it. Okay, so bears also do a lot of climbing. And remember when I showed you that bear bed a minute ago, I said that there was a tree next to it where it looked like the cubs had climbed, and that's the tree on the right over here. The picture in the center is not the cub, it's just an internet picture that I grabbed because it shows the angle perfectly. So when bears climb, they use their rear feet for the propulsion. This is what pushes them up. So they're pushing off with the rear feet and they're pulling up with the front. And notice that those feet are at different angles. So the hind feet are at an angle parallel to the trunk of the tree. And the front arms are at about a 45 or to 90 degree angle to the trunk. And that will translate to the claw marks that you see on the tree. So those ones on the left here, you see there are 5 claw marks here, and they're very perfectly vertical. They're aligned parallel with the trunk of the tree. Those were made by the hind foot. So the bear digs in its claws and pushes off, and that creates this mark. On the right, this is the tree that was next to that bed. And it can be hard to see because the bark, they kind of blend into the bark, but there are little claw marks on here where this was climbed. You can see various ones. There were a lot of climbing marks on this tree, so I couldn't tell how many times it had actually been climbed. But there were 2 mother bears in the area that summer, and one had 1 cub and one had 2 cubs. So I suspect because there was so much marking on this tree that it was the mom that had the 2 cubs that was residing at the base of this tree. So another sign that you find on trees, and I have been told that bears do not do this behavior, but Western bears do. So this is cambium feeding, and this is common in the spring when the sap is flowing in the trees, and that sap is very sweet. They will do this on redwood trees. These happen to be Douglas firs, but they will also do this on redwood trees. And they rip off the bark, and then they will eat the cambium layer that's underneath. And if this was fresh, you would actually be able to see tooth marks the uh, in the wood down here. So you would see little paired inside or just little marks in it from the bears chewing on the cambium of these trees. And that's a pretty good sugar content food source for them early in the year before other foods have started to ripen. So most of the berries and nut crops are not going to be ready until midsummer or fall. So early in the spring, their food sources are going to be things like cambium of trees, grasses and vegetation, skunk cabbage, and any logs that they can open up to get grubs and things. All right, so tracker Paul Resendez coined the term whammy trees, and that's his name for the sign that bears make, which is kind of cool. They'll give a tree a whammy. They'll just whack it and knock the top off of it. Sometimes they'll bite it and break the top off, like this one over here on the right. And they'll chew on it. They'll claw it. They'll pull down on saplings. And some of these have a lot of spring in them, and the bears actually pull them down and bite on them, chew on them, then let them go, and they fly back up. I've got some pretty interesting trail camera videos bears doing this. The one on the right, the bear actually spent an entire summer marking on that sapling. It would grab the sapling and put it over its shoulder and rub on it and take its feet and bend it over. And eventually, towards the end of summer, it fell onto the ground, and then the bear laid down on it and rolled on it to mark on it. So a lot of this has to do with leaving scent. And if you look very closely at these trees, you will often find snagged fur in them. And right here, a little bit of snagged fur right there. So you can find snagged fur in them. You can find claw marks and bite marks. And in this one on the left, you can see where the bark itself got peeled back by a claw right here, pushing it back. So they leave a lot of sign on these whammy trees. They will completely decapitate some saplings too. And this is, again, one of their marking behaviors that happens during the mating season. It peaks during the mating season. They will do it in spring and fall, but not as commonly as during the mating season, which is midsummer. So on the right is a tree that was completely decapitated by the bear. And you can see that's a little redwood sapling. And you can see the extent of the damage. The middle picture is a close-up of the top of that tree. So you can see how the bear literally just pulled all the branches down, bit the top off of it. I never could find the top of that tree. I don't know what he did with it, but it disappeared. And on the left is another one that got decapitated, but the top was still attached to it. So these are what Paul Resendez calls whammy trees. And again, it's a very visual type of marking where other bears will notice that these trees have been actively marked by a bear. And it's primarily the males that do that. I haven't seen females really doing this behavior. Females will rub their backs on trees, but I haven't seen them creating the whammy trees. Okay, so this is just a random mark, and an interesting thing that I've noticed a few times on trail camera is bears will be walking along, and just for some reason unknown to me, they'll reach up and just give a tree a whack, just whack, and just claw it just for no reason. And I don't know if that's a play behavior or what that's all about. Don't spend a lot of time doing it. They'll grab a branch, claw it, and let it go and move on. And it's just a really quick smacking a branch, and that's it. So you can see the 5 toes here. on the right. This is after it has aged a little bit excuse me, on the left is when it's fresh and the right is when it had aged a little bit. So this is just random whacking of trees. So foraging behavior on logs, and the log on the right was a log that was seeding at a campfire. The campfire pit is on the left, and it eventually rotted and wasn't for seeding anymore. But the bear came along last summer and opened that up to eat the grubs that were inside of it, and just completely, it just looks like it got blasted. It's opened up, and all the food that was inside on the bear has licked it clean of grubs and ants and anything else that could have been living in there, beetle larvae. The way I confirmed it was the bear was looking on this piece that is right here, because it had some nice bark on it, and that is what you see over here and here. You can see the claw marks of the bear where it ripped that open, and where its little excuse me, yeah, it just opened it up to get food. So what was another thing that was kind of interesting, we all know that gray foxes like to overmark things, right? So the bear came along, did his business on this log, and left. And then a fox came along and said, "Oh, I'm going to overmark this," and placed a scat right there. So that's a gray fox overmarking on a black bear feeding sign right there. Gray foxes, they mark on everything. So here's some more logs that show black bear activity. On the left, when you find these logs, I'm sure you've seen them in your forest down there. They're really lightweight because it is almost completely rotten. It's all punky, very lightweight. And you have pileated woodpeckers that can come along, and they can also pretty much take apart a log at that stage, but they don't take apart as large a chunk of a log as a bear does. So the bears are going to be more apt to knock off, 3 to 6 foot long chunks of log, as opposed to, something that's a few inches long, like a woodpecker is going to do. The one on the right here, this log was just completely opened up. This was a mom bear with 2 cubs, and there was a nearby tree trunk that had climbing marks from the cubs, and they were about 3 inches wide, just the 5 claw marks in parallel, about 3 inches wide, as her cubs were climbing the tree nearby while she was foraging in this log. So that's a feeding sign. When they open up logs like that, they're after any kind of beetle larvae, grubs, ant larvae, whatever they can get in there. That's a good protein source. This one was done freshly at the end of last summer. So right is the overview of this entire old stump. It's a really big Douglas fir stump, pair of them. And the bear came along and just opened it up and found anything in there that it could eat, and left quite a mess and moved on. So that's a feeding sign. And this was actually done early in the summer. I photographed it when it was pretty dry. This is another feeding sign that you will find in midsummer. So the white bark raspberries and the blackberries will all start to ripen around mid-June, July, around here. And the bears walk on top of those berry thickets and feed on the ripening berries. On the left here, there is a tree. So this tree right here was an apple, and it's been knocked down. The branch is actually facing downward because the bear tried to climb on it to get to the apples that were on that. So that tree has been overgrown by the berries, but the bears still go in there and try to climb on it to get the apples late in the summer. But what you notice about this sign here is how all the leaves are turned wrong side up. So these light sides of the leaves should not be facing the sun. those light sides of the leaves should be facing downwards. So that is one way to tell that there's sign here. And also that it's all flattened. You can see kind of a little flattened trough in there where the bear has been doing his walking in and out to get to those berries. Over here on the right, you can see there's a little path has been worn up to these berries, and then the berry vines themselves show just a whole bunch of sign where they've been flattened on top because the bear has been walking on top of them to get to those ripe, tasty little berries. And they do this a lot. They seem to be unbothered by the thorns that are on those berry thickets. Anybody that's ever picked berries knows that you get shredded by this, but bears have very tough calluses on the bottom of their feet, so it doesn't seem to bother them to walk onto these things. And they actually pluck the berries very delicately. They have very flexible lips and a long, flexible tongue, and they can walk up there and just pluck berries with their lips and not even leave any sign behind. They just pretty much take them right off. Bears behaving badly. All right, so sometimes bears do things that we don't want them to do. And really, I should have said humans behaving badly. Because why? Because we are responsible for our garbage and keeping our garbage bear proof. And in this case over here on the right, this is not bear proof. This plastic lid did nothing to stop the bear. Even with this metal bar on here, that didn't do anything to keep the bear out of this dumpster. It got up on top and grabbed the edge and pulled it. You can see his prints right here where he was standing, and he just grabbed the edge and pulled, and that thing opened right up. They're very strong. No problem for a bear to open that thing. Up above over here on the right, this is a jelly jar, one of those plastic ones that was completely licked clean by the bear that he got out of that dumpster. So they will get into garbage, and it's a learned behavior. They don't know this. They don't recognize garbage as food unless they've experienced it somewhere before. So they're very smart, and they will learn these behaviors if we humans are not careful about how we store our garbage. On the left here, you can see the 5 claw marks, but also notice the smudges here. See these smudges here where the toes were. So the furry little toes of this guy made marks on there, as well as the claws as he climbed up on it. Scats. So I'm going to show a few bear scats and their appearance. Remember that bear bed that I showed you where the mom and her cubs were living? One of the scats that I found at that bear bed happened to have this sitting on top. It's a bear claw, and that is an adult-sized black bear claw. And I was puzzled by this because I couldn't figure out how a claw would end up in a scat unless a bear scavenged another bear. And I asked a few people. I asked Sue Mansfield, who works with Dr. Lynn Rogers, and a few other people who know bears. And their consensus was that this bear probably scavenged a bear carcass someplace, and that's how this claw ended up in its scat, because they don't shed their claw sheaths like cats do. So with a cat, it's no problem. They'll shed that thing and they'll grow another one. But bears don't shed these things, so this had to come from a carcass. So at some point, this bear got into another bear's carcass. Okay, on the left is the typical appearance of a spring bear scat, and that will be when they're eating vegetation. In my area, it's a lot of grasses. They just consume hundreds of pounds of grasses every spring, and they just literally will go out there and graze in a field of grass. And if you go on my YouTube channel, you can see lots of videos of this, just bears grazing. And you wouldn't think that an animal like a bear that has such a reputation would be a grazer, but they are about 95% vegetarian. Most of their diet comes from growing things rather than from things they hunt. They can hunt things like fawns in the spring when the fawns are being born, but most of the times bears are not really built for running down prey. they're a large lumbering animal, and they're more suited to browsing things than they are to running down. So their diet in the spring is a lot of vegetation. On the right, they eat a lot of manzanita berries. They love those things. And you will find entire scats that are the color of manzanita berries and with undigested berries in them all summer long because they eat copious amounts of those manzanitas around here. On the left is the typical appearance of a blackberry scat. And when they do forage on those blackberries, a lot of times these scats, when they're fresh, will actually have a purple stain running from them because of the amount of juice from the blackberries that are in there. Because at times during the summer, the bear's diet is exclusively blackberries pretty much. On the right is huckleberry, which is more of an early fall scat, where the bears get into those, and huckleberries are really tiny. So you can imagine how many hours that bear had to spend foraging in the huckleberry thickets to amass this 6 inches wide and probably 6 inches long, that large amount of huckleberry seeds in its scat. That's a lot of foraging. And this is the fall scat, which is sometimes composed completely of acorn meal. And during the fall months, bears are in a state called hyperphagia. And what that is they're trying to pack on as many pounds as possible for the coming lean months of winter. Normally when they go into their dens and hibernate or go into torpor, they will not eat for those months. And so their idea in late summer, early fall is to consume as many calories as possible so that they develop a lot of fat reserves, and that can take them through the winter. So they will eat lots and lots of acorns and just straight off the tree if they can get them. Sometimes they'll climb the trees to get them, and other times they'll grab them off the ground. But it's not uncommon to find climbing marks on oak trees also that bears are climbing to get the acorns. So to conclude, there is a bear scat on the left and a bear claw, both of which were on display at the state park. And I included those just because those are also signs that you may find. Bears have teeth that are made for their type of lifestyle. So not only can they hunt prey, and they do sometimes, they can hunt things. So they need the canine teeth and the very sharp teeth for hunting and eating meat, but they also need teeth that are for grinding foods like acorns and nuts and berries and things. So the skull itself reflects their omnivorous diet in that they have both types of teeth for the type of lifestyle that they have. And black bears are capable of climbing trees even as adults because they have these nice curved claws. So this allows them to climb. Whereas grizzly bears, their claws are a little bit longer and less curved. So they have a much harder time climbing. They can, but it's a lot harder for them to do. So they don't do it as much. So that's all I have as far as black bear signs. There's a lot more sign I could have gone into, but we only had time, so I didn't have a lot of time to do it. And that's all I have.